Welcome everybody to the League of Women Voters Friday discussion. We're taking up warrant articles 23 and 24. However, we're starting with Article 24, which is a proposed bylaw amendment that would impose a 3-year moratorium on the use of artificial turf and establish testing requirements for artificial turf materials to be used on municipal playing fields. Article 23 proposes the appointment of a task force to develop standards and guidelines for determining whether natural grass, grass, or artificial turf should be installed on municipal playing fields. We welcome questions. You can put them in the chat, and I hope we'll have time for some in person as well. First, Article 24. Petitioner Susan Helms Daly will explain the intention and goals of the bylaw amendment regarding the surface of town playing fields. Thank you for joining us, Susan, and welcome, and you now have the floor.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that the League of Women Voters holds these seminars and just provides this opportunity for a deeper discussion. All right, I'm going to dive right in because our time is short and I would love to spend more time on questions. All right, so this is a quick summary of Warrant Article 24, which does propose a 3-year moratorium on building new artificial turf fields in Brookline. This was specifically written at this time because of the plan to install an artificial turf field at the Driscoll School, which is currently being renovated. Hence the urgency of this warrant article. I'm going to dive right in because that's that's the main that's the crux of this warrant article, is to avoid artificial turf for 3 years, and then after 3 years, to any artificial turf would have to be PFAS free. And I'll get into PFAS in a minute. Further, we explicitly grandfather Skyline and Sewell fields, which are already artificial turf and will remain artificial turf. In short, obviously there are some pros to artificial turf. They do require less maintenance, and they address the growing demand for field time in Brookline. And we acknowledge that our fields are overstressed and overused. But we feel that the cons really outweigh the pros. The cons being that artificial turf represents a loss of green space that can be used for multiple different uses. We know that they contain chemicals known as PFAS. We know that they have to be torn up and replaced every 10 years, roughly, to the tune of about $350,000 per replacement, and to the tune of about sometimes over 100 tons of solid waste that we're just throwing out and replacing. And that is toxic. That is waste that is plastic and contains these forever chemicals. We know that playing on artificial turf, the temperatures are much higher. And in a warming world, that should give us some pause. And we know that the climate impacts from this petroleum-based product, from replacing natural grass, which is carbon sequesterer, it moves us in the wrong direction on the climate front. And we know that it's a loss of habitat. All right, so what are PFAS? PFAS are polyfluoroalkyl substances. There are more than 10,000 different ones, so they're very hard to study and regulate, but there's a growing chorus of scientists calling for them to be regulated as a class. And there is a lot of work going on at the EPA to study this issue and to propose regulations for this issue. Massachusetts, as usual, is in forefront and has already set some important limits on PFAS in drinking water in the parts per trillion range. So that is that is very, very, very small amounts. The DEP has established a drinking water standard of 20 parts per trillion for 6 specific PFAS. And that is because they have known documented health effects on different parts of the body, including liver and thyroid and certain cancers. So, you know, the PFAS have been around for a long time, but they've only more recently been studied with more scientific rigor and have kind of gotten on the radar screens of regulators and companies. It's interesting, like the trend, trust me, the trend is to phase out PFAS. And if you look at giant airports, food, clothing, and furniture vendors, they are phasing these chemicals out. They want nothing to do with them. And that includes Burger King, Chick-fil-A, Levi's, and IKEA. They are seeing the writing on the wall that we do not want these chemicals in our products. This is a map from last October of the current PFAS levels in Massachusetts drinking water. And the red towns are the ones where the PFAS is already above the safe limit. Now, this alarming map is only going to get more alarming if we keep putting PFAS into the environment. You may have seen some stories. These are a couple just from the last month. In the Boston Globe, a state task force recommends Massachusetts do more to crack down on PFAS. This is from April 20th. Even more recently, May 2nd, the Massachusetts School Building Authority aims to slash the number of toxic chemicals used in construction of schools. And specifically, groups are targeting the most toxic chemical classes, including PFAS. So all of this leads the petitioners to propose invoking what's known as the precautionary principle, which is where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, the lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. This is a principle that's been invoked in treaties and other legislation, and it basically says, we'd rather be safe than sorry. Beyond the PFAS issues, we do know that artificial turf also, as I mentioned, has higher surfaces, sometimes 30 degrees higher than non-artificial turf surfaces. We know that this grass it's just because it's painted green doesn't mean it is a green space, and it is made of plastic, which breaks down, releases microplastics into the environment. And we also know that there have been some studies about exposure of players to artificial turf, including this one study where soccer goalies, which represent only 10% of players, had a much higher percent of the leukemia cases. And it's thought it's because of their greater exposure to the turf, since they're not just using their feet. There are a number of precedents in these are just in Massachusetts, and there's lots more nationwide.
I don't want to stop you, but we were expecting a time limit, and it's now 9:42. So if you can wrap up very quickly.
Great, thank you. So there are a number of towns doing this as well, but I want to spend just a minute on why we think a committee will not resolve this question. First of all, turf manufacturers.
If you're talking about the proposal in the next article, let's wait.
Okay, well, that one was written in response to this one. So, but I will wait, but I just want to say that even if we study it, we're still going to be right back where we are today, which is how do we as a town weigh these trade-offs? And there are trade-offs, but they're very challenging, and you know, a committee isn't going to solve it for us. We think it belongs in the jurisdiction of town meeting.
Okay.
I'll stop there. Thank you.
Sorry about having to push.
No, I appreciate it.
The advisory committee has referred this warrant article to basically the task force named in Article 23, should that pass. Parks and Recreation has voted no in a 6-1. School committee voted no 4-3. And the, sorry, the those are the positions as of the moment. So now I'm going to ask Mike Tuffle if he can share his screen and explain to us about Article 23, which is clearly in response to the proposals in Article 24.
Okay, thank you, Betsy, and I'll try to stick to 7 minutes. So Article 23 is indeed written in response to 24, and it suggests that we create a task force of experts to weigh into the multi-attributes that this trade-off between grass and synthetic turf involves. And so the task force, as described in the resolution, is trying to create some decision guidelines, and it's meant to draw on expertise from a wide array of expertise, including toxicology, environment, public health, many of the issues that Susan mentioned that PFAS might trigger. And here's the work plan. The select board would appoint it in June. It would have July, August, September, and October to do its work, report by November 4th, in time for town meeting to be able to vote if a new article akin to Warrant Article 24 is proposed. And that's in time for the Driscoll Building Committee to change course if they want to, which is a December 1st deadline. So this is an opportunity for us to get more information and put that information in front of town meeting or any other body that's based on expertise rather than just a mix of expertise and advocacy. So why is this task force needed? This is, as I said, a multi-attribute decision problem. Intensive use, like around large schools like Ridley and Driscoll, erodes grass, which becomes actually compacted dirt in a dust bowl. That changes the profile of the availability of the space and the injury risk. There's also different field closures. Some have mentioned heat island effect associated with natural synthetic turf. That has traditionally been measured with crumb rubber-based synthetic turf. What would happen, what's being proposed for Driscoll is what's at Ridley, which is a cork and sand mix is the infill. So that is less hot in the sun, but it is still hotter than grass. So it gives us this summer to do some measurements and actually figure that out. But you have to balance that based on the much greater unavailability of natural grass due to rain and growing seasons where you cordon off the grass to allow it to grow. There's lots of consequences of poor field quality, which triggers equity concerns. Some folks can pay for private soccer clubs, which they'll go and practice on synthetic turf, while the less, some students don't have access to that. We do need to look into the health risks. You know, PFAS is a big problem, but how much of that has to do with the residue on some synthetic turf? Nobody actually knows that question. So saying that PFAS is a big problem, I totally agree with. Saying that there's some residue on PFAS blades of grass, okay, I think I've heard 1 or 2 people say that. I'll take that at face value. That doesn't mean that this is necessarily a health risk. We need to look into the environmental aspects. There's trade-offs of water, chemical exposure, and so on. And then costs, you know, have actually been looked into already. They're roughly a wash when you think about the installation and removal and maintenance between the two. But we need that all spelled out clearly for town meeting's benefit. So I did propose this as And I'm hoping actually that 23 will pass and 24 will either be referred or just voted down because it's not really ready for prime time, in my opinion. So two main questions that I want to raise is there any evidence that Brookline synthetic turf poses health or environmental risks from PFAS? There's no evidence I'm aware of or that the petitioners of 24 have provided. Secondly, does the Warrant Article 24 pose a sensible standard to avoid PFAS risks from Brookline synthetic turf if such a risk exists? It's unclear, and I'll say why. So first, there was just the Massachusetts PFAS Interagency Task Force. That part of its charge was explicitly to identify the sources of PFAS contamination and exposure pathways that pose the greatest risk to public health and the environment. Its final report cites many sources: food packaging, household materials, personal care products, non-stick cookware, water-resistant clothing, firefighting foam was mentioned 30 times. This is a major source. We're not targeting that with this article. We're targeting turf. Turf never mentioned in this report. If it's a big deal, you'd think that they would at least mention it once. Secondly, does it provide us, even if there is a risk, would Warrant Article 24 as written help us mitigate that risk? Well, I don't think so, because the test protocols it describes to conclude that synthetic turf is free of organic fluorine and therefore permitted after 2025 has some big question marks, in my opinion. It cites several EPA methods. Those methods are for drinking water. Are those drinking water test methods appropriate for testing solids? I don't know. I haven't heard any evidence that it is. Warrant Article 24 doesn't specify the test specificity. Is a parts per million test sufficient? Per billion or per trillion? It's not specified. What about the test thresholds? If it finds 2 parts per million, is that allowed or is that not allowed? If it finds 1 part per trillion, is that in or out? No guidance in Warrant Article 24. Is this approach that Article 24 just attests that something is free of organic fluoride based on any recognized national or state approach? Not that I'm aware of. And finally, is it actionable? The synthetic turf proposed for Driscoll was subjected to one of the 2 tests that Warrant Article 24 lays out as best as it could be. It tested against all the PFAS substances listed in the 2 EPA methods specified, roughly 25. All of them were determined not detectable at the 1 part per million level. Is that therefore free of organic fluorine according to that test? I haven't heard anyone make a decision about that, including the opinion of the petitioners of Warrant Article 24. So to the extent we want to protect ourselves against PFAS, we first need to find out, is this where we want to target our efforts? Or maybe we should be thinking about the items listed in the interagency task force. And secondly, we really need much clearer guidance about what's in or out. So in sum, I'm going to urge town meeting to vote yes for Warrant Article 23 that establishes a task force, and either to refer or no action on 24, because in my opinion, it needs work before it's ready for entering our bylaws. So with that, that's 7 minutes, and I'm going to yield the rest to Q&A. Do you want me to start answering some of the questions, Betsy, that are in the chat?
If you can address questions in the chat, I urge you to take them on.
All right, so Marcus asked, oh, sorry, excuse me, this is, but let me see if I can address it too. Does the turf field address many of your child safety concerns? My understanding that it's cork as opposed to rubber pellets. And so let me say part of that and then turn to Susan. So it indeed Ridley uses cork and sand as the infill. That is exactly what is proposed for Ridley. The Parks and Rec is no longer endorsing the use of crumb rubber as the infill, which does have some toxicity questions and it exacerbates heat island. Susan, do you want to speak on that?
I'll just add what well, a couple of my co-petitioners also addressed that issue in the chat already, so okay. I'll just refer people to that.
Okay, great. And Jonathan Golden says, if the trade-offs are so challenging, why does the petitioner object to more community engagement and public education about the issues? Jonathan, I'm not sure which petitioner you're referring to. It's not me, if that's your good question. I'm not sure.
I think that's probably for us.
Okay, go ahead. You want to take it?
Sure. I appreciate the question because it certainly, we're not against further study and further information to inform this debate. We just believe strongly that we have enough cause for concern that we that we can make a decision today. You know, the climate balance clearly tips in favor of having natural grass instead of artificial turf. The toxics balance, like, yes, we are going to have to make some sacrifices if we hold true to our town's values and expressed desire to be net zero at some point. One thing I didn't get a chance to say is that artificial turf, when the sun shines on it, it releases methane and ethylene, which are greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming. That's just, you know, that's regardless of the PFAS, that's regardless of the substrate that's used. And so, you know, we're patting ourselves on the back for, oh, we're going fossil fuel free, we're going to be net zero in Brookline. We can't do that with artificial turf because it will just sit there emanating, off-gassing methane, which is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So
may
yeah.
I interject here? There are other questions that are somewhat related and your view would be useful, having to do with the fact that the grass surfaces are shut down for many days of the year for a variety of reasons. It's got to do with weather, it's got to do with maybe overuse or whatever. And so there is at least a reason to consider artificial turf because it does not suffer from those, let's call it seasonal impacts, but basically that put the fields out of use for a period of time. I don't know how you can sort of respond to that, but I think it addresses the questions that you're raising.
Well, absolutely, and that's why in one of my first slides I said that's the biggest pro of artificial turf, but what I have heard from
there a better way to do grass.
Right. Well, there's a lot of work going on right now to study that. What are the hardiest species of grass? What are the drainage concerns that we can address with, you know, to make the situation better for grass? You know, games are still going to be rained out even with artificial turf. But I do, and maybe we'll start canceling games because it's too hot to play on turf. I mean, we're only setting records every year with new heat records. So it just seems like we're moving backwards if we are putting something down that will only be hotter as we live in a hotter and hotter world. But it's kind of a trade-off that everyone kind of has to weigh for themselves. Because I appreciate that there are real trade-offs.
Okay, in the questions or in the chat, there are comments, I guess, to which you may wish to make some sort of response. From Andrew Fisher, PFAS is only one of the problems with plastic artificial grass. Other issues include the use of carbon-emitting fossil fuel to manufacture the artificial grass. Doesn't affect that plastic surfaces create heat islands, which are also related to climate change, and doesn't address the cost of removing and disposing of the plastic on a regular basis. Do you want to comment about that?
Yeah, so this is absolutely one of the things that this is what makes it a multi-attribute decision problem. And this is why there's 10 things specified in the resolution that I drafted that said needs to be concerned, needs to be examined. Not just the PFAS element, but all of these elements. And then it's going to be a trade-off. Look, we make trade-offs every day. Harvard has made a fossil fuel neutral and a fossil fuel free goal, and we're still buying carpets We're still buying upholstery. We're still buying things made of fossil fuels. Brookline is still building buildings. It is still paving the roads every year. That is a fossil fuel derivative in asphalt. We can go back to dirt roads if we want. There's lots of trade-offs we make every day. We need to focus on the important things. On fossil fuels, for example, that's electricity, it's transportation fuels. These are the big levers we have, and we have to stage our efforts, and we have to focus on what's most important first, in my opinion. Betsy, there's also Naomi has a hand
Yeah,
up.
I know. I see a hand up. Naomi, you may speak. You have to unmute yourself, I think.
Thank you. Thanks to the League for hosting this, and really appreciate petitioners for both warrant articles putting these together. I'm Naomi Schweitzer, town meeting member, precinct 10. I have a request for the petitioners of both, and then a question for the petitioners of warrant article 23. The request is, given the high amount of traffic and information on both of these warrant articles and the number of new town meeting members that we have not on the listserv prior to their election, besides the combined, what's in the combined report, both warrant article petitioners have like a one-pager with all the links that you would like us to prioritize reading, given people have a limited amount of time. So it's just a wish. You don't need to answer it now, but it would be great to have each warrant article say, here is the document that we'd really like you to focus on prior to town meeting to get our perspective. And so I can also engage with neighbors and new town meeting members who are asking for help getting through all of this stuff. The second thing is a question.
Naomi, if you can stop for a second. Susan, do you have any response to what Naomi's saying? Susan has to leave.
I do, and I apologize for that. It was such a good discussion, and I love your suggestion, Naomi. I'm 100% on board. I'd be happy to work on that.
Yeah, and same thing. I have to leave in a minute too. The combined reports is where I would direct you, Naomi, and others for as far as 23.
Okay. And for the record, the next edition of combined reports, I think, is in the mail as we speak.
It was released today. The supplement was released today.
Yeah, right. So the supplements are on their way to help people understand what we can all agree are a set of rather complex issues with a lot of unanswered questions, I think I'm going to say. Sorry, Naomi, you may carry on, but I don't think we're going to be able to get any more response from petitioners.
Okay, thank you. And then my question for Mike is on the committee that would be set up under 24. My understanding is it would be under the auspices of Parks and Rec. Is that correct? And then I have a second.
Yeah, the original article that I drafted had suggested it be under the auspices of Park and Rec, but AC and then the select board proposed that it be under the auspices of the select board. And I support that. I was only concerned that the select board didn't have capacity, but they're taking it on. They voted in favor of it. So I'm delighted that they are doing so. So it'll be it's under the auspices of the select board in consultation with the health department and the Parks and Rec in terms of who goes on it, but it's a select board committee.
Okay. I feel like it's very important for that committee that there be crystal clear transparency of who is on it and all of their affiliations. So in terms of explaining to folks, it would be good to hear from the petitioners more specifically how people will be selected and how their affiliations will be known. So including things like, is a member of, part of the Massachusetts Public Health Association? Is someone part of the Association of Soccer Clubs? Is someone have any affiliation with grass and fertilizer companies or any affiliation with chemical companies?
Yeah.
And that includes Brookline residents who might be really involved kind of in, it's like, I think it's really important to understand really what voices people are bringing and not just their top line title. People have multiple affiliations. This is very political. It's very sensitive. People have a lot of strong feelings about their kids exercising and their kids not getting cancer, and the environment. And so we need to know who's on it and what voices their whole selves are bringing to this conversation. So anything you can do to clarify how that selection will be made and how we will know who is sitting on that committee would be really helpful.
Yeah, so Naomi and I, just for the background of others on the call, are sort of two big champions of transparency measures in our town meeting advocacy. Naomi, I completely agree with you, 100%. And let me suggest that you and I work offline to create some document that's a request. It'll be a select board committee, so I can't tell them to do these things. But if you and I together advocate for that level of transparency, I think it's much more likely that they'll do it. So I'm delighted to work with you. We can connect offline if you'd like. 100% support what you're saying.
I'm going to suggest, I hope everyone has access to the chat. And since, as I understand it, Mike will have to be leaving.
Yeah.
Do you have time to take any more questions, or do you need to go?
Are there more questions for me in the chat? I'm also putting my name and email in the chat in case anyone wants to talk to me about this stuff. But most importantly, I would say talk to your town meeting member representatives, because they need to hear what their constituents are thinking about this. And you know, democracy works best with an engaged constituency. So let me just close my own remarks by thanking Betsy and Ernie for this series and for having this topic and for squeezing us in half an hour, which fits our schedules at this somewhat last minute. So I appreciate it. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm sorry I have to duck out. Again, feel free to email me if you like.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm very sorry you haven't got more time to spend, because clearly these are both, the matters involved in both of these articles are significant and important to both health and other aspects of our life in town. So we appreciate bringing it up, and we'll see what town meeting has to say about it. Thanks very much. For the record, folks, I told you what the votes were already on Article 24. As of now, on Article 23, the school committees voted yes, the select board has voted yes, the advisory committee has voted yes, and Parks and Rec have voted yes. So that's the record up to now on the status of Article 23, which is the referral to create a task force. Now that we've lost our speakers, we're willing to listen to other people's comments. If you want to raise your hand, you're free to do so, but I'm not sure we're going to get clear answers for you. And if I don't see any hands in the up.
Hi, Betsy.
Yes.
My hand is up. It's Clint Richmond. How are
Okay.
you?
I'm
Andrew Fisher and myself are co-petitioners of Warrant Article 24, along with Susan Helms Daly and Claire Stanford, who can't be here today, but we're happy to stay and answer questions as long as people like, and as long as you all have time to run the meeting.
okay. Well, we can certainly stay longer. Thank you, Clint, and thank you, Andrew, both for offering. Andrew, do you have something you want to comment?
I share Clint's offer to stay and answer questions. And I have one slight comment. It's very facile to say, well, there's lots of other things we can do too. Let's not do this one. I think to reduce carbon emissions, I think that that's an excuse to not do anything ever. Each one we do is helpful. And none of us can eliminate PFAS or carbon emissions entirely from our lives, but some things are easier to do, and some things require less of a sacrifice, and some things are necessary and we can't eliminate them so easily. But to say, well, there's lots of other things we can do instead, is not an excuse for doing the simple ones, including this one.
Okay, I saw Diana Spiegel's hand up and then Diana vanished. Diana, are you still with us? Do I not see you? Okay, maybe not. Diana? All right, I have another hand up. Well, I had another hand up. Yes, Donna Silverman and then Rosalind Bieber. Donna, you need to unmute.
Sorry, thank you, Betsy. I'm wondering what were the factors leading the decision to arrive at a 3-year moratorium rather than a 2-year or a 4-year? What is the basis of the 3-year moratorium on Article 23? I mean, 24, excuse me, 24.
Thank you, Donna. This is Clint Richmond, the original petitioner of Warrant Article 24. Both Wayland, Concord, and Sharon have had 3-year moratoria. It seems like a good number to pause and reflect. In this case, you know, we can install turf. I mean, we can install grass at Driscoll and you know, and evaluate it and see if it will work in that location, especially if we don't overuse it and put the school use first, right? The school children use it for gym and recess. But Concord has just renewed their moratorium for another 5 years. So they're quite hesitant, I guess I would say, about artificial turf. So, you know, it seemed like a reasonable pause. It's just based on precedent. I mean, you're right. It could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, it could be 5 years. There's no special, there's no magical number, but it's a number that's enough to pause and take a breath and assess whether we want additional turf fields in addition to the 4 that we already have.
Thank you.
I'm Rosalind Feldberg, and I wanted to say it's not clear to me why, even if Article 23 passes and we have this committee, we cannot also have a moratorium. I don't see the two as being mutually exclusive. Is there something that I'm missing that says that if we have the committee, we have to then start doing some kind of artificial turf? Or, you know, I just don't get why we can't still have a moratorium. But I think it would be useful to have an in-depth look at the problems with artificial turf, and also to find out whether there are also both better grass fields that can be built as well as better artificial turf fields. Thank you.
And just a footnote here, if this task force is formed, they would presumably be able to make a recommendation with regard to a moratorium for whether there should be one, and if so, how long. So my guess is that the issue of a moratorium, if Article 23 is passed, would not go away. It would just have to be reconsidered. Anyway, Regina Frawley, you got your hand up. Regina?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I really keep asking the same question, and not one committee I've attended has answered it. We paid tens of millions of dollars to get rid of the ash damage from the incinerator. Nobody's telling me whether, even without factoring in for inflation, where are we going to get rid of our artificial turf every single 10 years? Who will take it? Because we sent most of the dirt from the incinerator out to Ohio, if I remember correctly. Very, very costly. And that needs to be a factor. I happen to think health is the #1 factor, but we cannot ignore our duty about fiscal. Does anybody at all have an answer to that? #1, that's question 1. And #2, if we don't vote for the moratorium, wouldn't that leave the possibility of putting artificial turf individually at any time, even though there's a task force? In other words, those decisions can be made individually ongoing without the moratorium. Thank you.
Regina, you're correct. Yeah, if 24 does not pass, then planning on additional turf fields can continue, possibly new fields. The field study that was commissioned by DPW following the defeat of the artificial turf field at Cypress mentioned 4 additional turf fields. Some of those might be conversions, some of those might be new they didn't specify where and when, but clearly there was a push for additional artificial turf fields in that. Artificial turf fields, because they're so heavy, right? It's 50 tons per acre. It's generally landfill. For the carpet, for Downs, for example, which is our most recently, that's actually the only turf field we've disposed of. The carpet was sent, some of it was sent to batting cages, which sounds nice, but again, that's not a high performance surface. It doesn't have to have turf on it, and that's not a traditional material, even though some baseball fields are turf. But that's bad in a way, because what you're doing is you're spreading the PFAS. You spread it in Brookline. Now you're sending it to Maine, which is I think where a lot of them went, and now you're spreading PFAS and other chemicals from worn out turf to other locations. So it's a kind of it's a not as attractive a position solution as you might think.
If I could add to what Clint's saying, most of the plastic turf, like most other plastic, is sent to third world countries. We pay them to take it, and they basically don't have anything to do with it. It just sits there. The cost of in the cost comparisons that have been offered, they're the cost of paying for a third world country to take it. It's not that doesn't include the environmental cost of not disposing of it at all.
Now, I'm going to put a little footnote in here that people have added to our chat with regard to votes that people have taken on Article 23. The Advisory Council on Public Health voted against Article 23. Solid Waste Advisory Committee and the Brookline Green Space took no positions on Article 23, just to add that to the other positions that we've discussed. And then there have been several comments that suggest that the subject matter of both warrant articles is capable of being dealt with simultaneously, or if there is a task force, it could address the issues raised in both. Just for the record, the task force would be given some sort of mission statement or some sort of purpose, but my bet is that it would have the flexibility to undertake getting answers to these questions. And I'm pretty sure that members of the public, some of whom are with us today, would follow very closely to be sure that they did accomplish that. So whatever that's worth. Now, I don't know that I see another question hand up. Yes. Pardon, sorry, please.
Oh, thank you. Yes, my hand is up.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Arden Reamer, town meeting member from Precinct 8. And I just want to say I am a warrior combating the climate crisis. I absolutely want to make Brookline the most sustainable place on earth. But I am also the parent of a Brookline High School student who just finished track and field at Downs Field. He just finished the season, and a 7th grader at the Ruffin Ridley School. I also live across the street from the organic cork and coconut turf field at Ruffin Ridley, and have lived here long enough to have lived across the street from it when it was grass, though it was never grass. It was either mud or dust, I mean dirt that literally would blow dust bowls onto all of us who lived across the street. And I was also a member of the Devotion School, as it was called in the day, building committee for 3 years, for the entire 3 years. And I just want to say that I am heartbroken at the thought of warrant article 24 passing. It would be, I think, a travesty to our youth. I watch what goes on across the street from my house on that field day in and day out. It is used almost nonstop from dawn until dusk every single day. And that is true. I mean, even in the winter months when grass would definitely be out of commission, It's played on through the, I mean, obviously during the school day, but way afterwards, as long as it's light out and even into the dark in these warmer months. And I know what it's like with grass. It is out of commission for the month of March while it restores and recuperates from the winter. And it is also taken out of use, obviously, with the rains after rain and things like that. And I just think about what I witness across the street from my house and what I see going on at a K-8 school and the amount of use and the trade-off involved in what you're talking about to combat this climate crisis. But I too want to combat the climate crisis, just not at the expense of Brookline's children and youth. And I really think this is a matter of, you know, it's a matter of well-being. It's a matter of it's needs-based. I mean, obesity is a real issue with children. They just survived 2 years of a pandemic. I mean, to have their space to play on whenever they need to play, which is all the time, so that they can be healthy, both physically and mentally. I just think that I find Warrant Article 24 really quite heartbreaking. And on that, I'll sign off. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Donna Viola, she says there's an extremely tough and long-lasting grass, zoysia, that should be looked into. This is long-lasting, very durable. Let's do our best for our children, whom we would like to grow into healthy adults without having deadly diseases later in life. Artificial turf uses infills of crumb rubber from recycled tires, and is known that tires contain carcinogens. We also know that it is only in the interest of the tire companies to have a way to get rid of their waste. It may be good for the companies, but not necessarily for human beings. So, but there does seem to be a natural gas that could be thought about or looked into. And I would suggest that another approach to all of this for discussion would be what's the best natural gas, because there seems to be at least a variety out there that are available, that it's not clear always that let's just say price may have something to do with the grass that is selected for actual fields. Anyway, having moved on, is there another hand up? Somebody who wants to speak?
Yes, I have my hand up.
Then speak. Regina.
Okay. Just in case, the remote possibility that there's one or two people who haven't already become very knowledgeable about this. It really comes down to whether you want usability versus the risk analysis, whether it's health or cost or both. So, you know, depending on which value you place higher is where the votes are going to come. The other point is, I have a wonderful front lawn of weeds. We don't just have to, and they survive year in, year out, 12 months a year. That's also a possibility for the fields. We need to stop thinking about mowing grass and think about what does survive climate. And finally, I really am concerned about considering climate change literally, universally, not just in Brookline. And we really have to take that responsibility along with the costs of everything, both health-wise and fiscally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Regina. So do we have any other comments from people who have joined us? Then I'm going to say thank you all. And in particular, it's very important that this discussion continue at town meeting, because one of the important things is that we air as many aspects of the issue as possible and try to come to the most appropriate and responsive solution. We've heard, and it's clear, that the questions that rise about playing fields are complicated, and when they're out of service, that's not a good thing. But on the other hand, we don't want our children to be infected by having played on fields that may contain contamination of some sort. So it's important to have these thoughts and to arrive at town meeting with some understanding of the questions you need to ask and try to get answered in order to come to a reasonable decision. And I therefore wish all of the town meeting members good luck on the debate, and I can watch and see how things go. But at the moment, really appreciate everybody being here, appreciate the comments and the engagement on this issue, which is broad and affects us in different ways, depending on our age, perhaps. And I think when my kids were in school, it was all natural. I don't think we had any we didn't. I know we didn't have any artificial turf in those days. But it's important to to try to come to the best possible decision. I do appreciate everyone being here and hope that we'll see you again. But next Tuesday, go to town meeting and be prepared.